Okay, hello everybody, welcome to another video. Today's intro was shamelessly stolen from Suzin here on Reddit because it made me laugh my ass off. So, absolutely, this week we've got Thief. Thief is going to be the next elite specialization. You know, that was good reason, good cause to believe that we wouldn't get one this week. We had 3 elite specializations at first, then a bit of a break, then another 3. Some people were thinking, you know, then it was reasonable to have another break, and then the final 3. Especially considering this month is the famed month for challenging group content that's going to be revealed at PAX. It would have been reasonable to have not had ArenaNet reveal something, right? Maybe? But so they're really running full steam ahead. I think one of the reasons for this isn't just to keep us happy. This is definitely a week where if they were trying to spread all the news out, they could have done so. I think that they're doing this because for the next beta weekend event, they want us to have maybe even all the elite specializations. If you think about it, after this, there's only 2 more. So, you know, next week we get the next one, next week we get the one after that, and then it's beta weekend event 2, and every single elite specialization's in the game. Yeah, I could see that happening. So let's talk specifically about what we're looking at here. Or should I say the Daredevil. So this is the tweet itself. There's a little discussion to be had. They give us with this image that this promises to be a distracting week. ... And when RB2 says this, I think that's Ruby that put this one out. I think RB is just Regina. When Ruby says this, I think this is probably a hint about something to do with the playstyle of this class, the niche it's going to tap into, and we'll do some discussion on that. But as you can see, most importantly from the image, this is a thief wielding what is quite apparently a staff. There's some funny images people are doing where they say, oh no, it's just a really, really, really long rifle. No, we get a staff. So the thief community has been, like many of these elite specializations actually, a bit of a split community. You know, some people wanted rifles, some people wanted staff. So there are naturally a few disappointed comments out there. But actually in general, I think the idea of having a melee staff is still very exciting. The number one thing a lot of us saw with the Ventari reveal for the Revenant was, hey, I wanted a melee staff on Thief. I'm a little concerned that we might not be getting that. They talked specifically about how Revenant melee staff as super high damage was thought of before, and then they kind of tuned it back. Well, maybe they thought of that high damage idea as something for the Thief. But then do consider as well that elite specializations could be trying to change the game a lot. So instead of what we generally associate thieves with a lot of high damage, instead maybe we're looking at something a bit more sustainy. So before I go on too long about the staff, the name Daredevil, try not to think too much about the Marvel superhero, the blind superhero who always get confused with Deadpool. Yeah, shoot me. If we just think about it in its purest terms, yeah, you don't often see like Daredevil as a class in MMOs. I mean, you might in some of these, you know, Asian MMOs that have tons and tons and tons and tons of classes, and then they kind of have these weird names that get changed in translation. But I think Daredevil's an okay elite specialization name. In general, now that we've seen the majority of them, if Daredevil does end up being this name, I think for the majority of them, I'm lukewarm rather than super excited. I'm not sure whether that's the sentiment many of you guys share. Why are we all saying Daredevil? Well, it is, of course, because of data mining. The fact that the Berserker ended up bang on point makes it seem more likely that the Forge and the Daredevil are both correct names. And as ever, I will cover the relevant data mining where possible because it does shape a lot of the predictions we can make about this class. So moving on, let's talk a little bit more about staff. How exactly is it going to be used? I don't think anyone's expecting a magic, you know, a casting staff. I don't think anyone's expecting high range on this staff. I think if ArenaNet do want to at some point add, you know, a super range capability to the Thief, that elite specialization surely will be the rifle that they choose. I think we're getting some kind of a martial artist, some kind of melee staff user, some kind of monk, traditionally as we would think of monks, playstyle. Obviously in the Guild Wars franchise, monk is really heavily associated with the idea of a dedicated healer, and I don't think would be the name even if Daredevil ends up being wrong. But how would the staff be used? One thing to consider straight away is this is on the Thief, and unless the unique mechanic changes, which I believe it will probably just be augmented, added to the idea of stealing rather than being removed entirely, this will have initiative. So I think when we're thinking about the things that the staff can do, it's going to have some interesting designs, some different design to what we see on the other weapons. This is the first two-hander we have seen be added to a class for a long time since the Reaper, so there's a lot of skills we can speculate about, and these are going to be cooldown-less skills as well. That means whatever our powerful, iconic kind of skill 5s or whatever on this weapon are, in theory, going to be sort of spammable. So I think they're going to, for the core mechanic, tap into the idea of initiative a little more and chaining, comboing things together. I think they might take some of these elements, given the theme of the Daredevil, some of the elements of the assassin in Guild Wars 1, where you would have like specific chain combos. So like you would use the 1 into the 2 into the 3, and like you'd have like these building block puzzle pieces you'd put together. They might try and key that into the martial artist style of gameplay we see here, and perhaps tweak initiative just a little. I would say as well that you have to pay close attention to the fact we're getting another melee weapon on Thief, a class that in general already excels with its melee capabilities. Across the various formats, there is reason to use sword, and there is a lot of reason to use dagger as well. They've already got like a lot of melee-ish stuff going on. So how does staff fit in? It's not going to be like some kind of raw damage upgrade, just really complicated to pull off rotations. I think actually it's going to fit into a different niche. One thing we tend to associate with thieves at the moment is the idea of being very quick, like they're generally fast attacking even when they use their swords. Maybe the staff is going to be, we saw quick gameplay too on the Revenant. Maybe these are going to be like big hits, but they'll be a little bit slower. That would be one way in which they take the Thief and turn it on its head for the elite specialization. And it's always weird. I think Arena are in an odd spot because when they try and just add to the class, people tend to be a bit disappointed. When they try and change the concept a lot, the idea of adding something a bit slower to a Thief, some people will get it and they'll like that it's a big change of flavor for their profession, but then other people will hate it, just like we saw, for example, with the Dragon Hunter, and saying, oh, I never picked this class for ranged and I never picked this class for traps in the first place. So they're in a bit of a catch-22 there. I just wonder mostly how they'll deal with staff. I think the only thing I'd be really disappointed about with this specifically is if it's very CC oriented. And that's just because I think we've already got a lot of decent CC in there already. Even on the Thief itself, not including other classes, is okay with its CC capabilities. And for PvE, with everything moving to break bars, I don't know really how excited I would be by something like that. One other thing about the staff too is it's not really 5 skills we're getting. We're potentially getting, 5 skills, a 3-part auto attack chain, and a stealth skill on the auto attack, an alternate ability that will proc when you're in stealth. So this is a lot of abilities. Then a unique mechanic change. Maybe we'll get in a completely different F1. It's no longer about stealing stuff, because then it's going to have a different name. It's not really a thief anymore. The idea of having steal on it, I think, is probably going to change. And we may not just have an F1, we may have an F2, or even all the way up to an F3 or something. Another thing to point out, considering that this is a two-handed weapon, another staple of the Thief is their dual skill. So this is the idea that depending on what you dual wield and how, that skill 3 changes to be like a combination of both weapons in both of your hands. There's not going to be that element on the staff unless the dual skill is also something that's going to change as a Daredevil. And this is totally possible. It could be that when you are a Daredevil, all your dual skills across your other weapon combinations also maybe are tweaked slightly or changed. And it could even be that they flip it on its head that the dual skill you have on your staff somehow accounts for the weapon you have on your other set, and I've read a few bizarre suggestions like that. Some people are fans of the idea of them getting kits for their utility skills too, which I'll talk about in a second, and even that could be interacting in some way. Last little thing to talk about with like the weapon skills. With staves, I do wonder cosmetically, and this isn't a big thing, how many staves are really fitting? How many staves do we have that are super fitting for thieves? With Revenant, I think a lot of staves in the game, they're kind of dainty, and they were clearly made for spellcasters, right, visually. And some of them can seem really weird to use on a Revenant. It just so happens that there's also a couple of scythe-looking ones, and there's a couple of meteor-looking ones. I'm really curious how many great staff skins there's going to be for us to wield as a Daredevil out there. And hopefully Heart of Thorns, when it comes out, will address that and give us some cool ones. Specifically, we know that we'll get, the Daredevil helmet you're seeing in the image, and this lovely staff here with all of these tassels around it. But what else is there going to be? I'm curious about that. Let's have a look at the utility skills. First, we have the idea of physicals. Physicals are on a lot of people's lips right now because there was recent data mining which showed physical skills as a cooldown reduction associated with thieves. So this would suggest you can trait to drop the cooldowns of your physical skills when you're a Daredevil. The fact that you're kind of martial arty, you're wielding a staff, it's thematically in line. But here's the catch. The other bit of data mining that came with this at the same time, some of the Berserker stuff, never ended up in the game. This was at the exact same time as we saw a break bar, for example, on the Berserker, and some slightly different wording. So, because it's from that same pool I actually think we're not at 100% chance that physical skills will appear on the Thief. In general, I think the idea of physical skills appearing on the Daredevil Thief is not actually that exciting. Don't forget they updated the idea of physical skills to give better effects when you have high endurance, and using endurance is a big part of Thief gameplay, so incentivizing people on that class to not use it, you can say add some interesting dynamics to activating the abilities, but I'd actually say it just doesn't fit too well. And there are actually 3 different classes of utility skills I think we are all likely to see, and I'll explain why for each one. So let's start with the tried and true, the classic kits. Now, kits, I think, have always had a hard chance to appear on an elite specialization, because around the time that they moved us to the specializations in general, not the elite ones, they refined a couple of mechanics, and one of those was the way kits worked on the engineer. Specifically, they changed a lot of them visually, and there were many mechanical changes at that. And one of the reasons they could have done this, they overhauled the actual technology with the way kits worked. One of the reasons they may have done this would have been, in theory, so they can add kits onto another class. And indeed, again in the world of data mining, that shaman threw out this tweet a while ago, showing what appears to be a kit and what appears to be throwing knives. So it would make sense that the Daredevil has their melee capabilities with their staff, but then also can have a variety of kits, ninja-themed kits, I suppose, that then further augments them and gives them different capabilities. Again, it fits thematically, but more importantly, we don't just have a tooltip, we actually have something that's been fully modeled and created by someone to be dropped in the game, and that makes it far more likely than just the idea of some, trait text. However, there will be some purists out there. We had this discussion on the channel before. People think that if you're going to give a kit to an elite specialization, you have to remove weapon swap. They could maybe do that for the Thief. I think in general that doesn't actually have to happen. They don't have to lose their weapon swap. And we also can't discount the idea that this kit, though it is data mined and it could appear in Heart of Thorns, it might not actually have anything to do with an elite specialization. This could easily be, somewhere in one of the story instances we play, or in one of the new maps we explore, you can speak to an NPC who gives you a kit. And don't forget that we do have the Itzel, who themselves are very ninja-y, very dexterous. I can really see maybe this had some tie to or mastery at some point. This is something you unlock from a vendor with an Itzel guy, and maybe might not have anything to do with the elite specializations whatsoever. There's also the idea that, throwing knives and throwing stars, your shuriken and all these kind of badass kits, are they best on the Daredevil, or are they best on, like, a second generation elite specialization for the Thief called the, Ninja? So maybe they haven't done this at all. So those are the pros and cons to kits. Next of the 3, I want to talk about rage skills. So we just had the Berserker. Maybe there's a very specific reason they gave us the Berserker before they're giving us the Daredevil. And on the Berserker, we heard a couple of things. We heard that they were adding an entirely new type of utility skill instead of borrowing one from another class. Why did they do this? Originally, they said they wanted to have multiple classes using the same types of utility skills so that they could create those runes. Why would they do that? Maybe the idea was always to have rage skills on more than one profession. We even further heard from Robert G on the live stream that rage skills augment your unique profession mechanic. And wouldn't it then make sense that maybe the Daredevils might not just get adrenaline themselves, a Daredevil having adrenaline being reckless absolutely fits thematically, and then they would have rage skills to help play into that. Or you could even just have rage skills affecting initiative directly. The angrier you get, the more initiative you have. Rage skills, I think, could be very, very likely. There's been no data mining to substantiate it. This is a totally new type of skill we've heard about even recently. But, maybe they put rage skills on 2 classes, create a rune set for it for Heart of Thorns, and perhaps that was the plan. So there's rage skills. And then third and last of all that I think is highly likely could be clones. I don't leave clones for last because I value them the highest. I actually think rage is a really, really cool idea. But specifically look at the text of the tweet. This promises to be a distracting week. A distracting week. So perhaps, this could be this kind of CC playstyle. Perhaps another way that thieves will be tricky and acrobatic and slippery fish is that they'll get clones available. And don't forget that clones aren't just like a mechanic and a thing that mesmers can generate, but there is actually a type of utility skill called clones. So we could see clones appear. And again, one other little excitement there is that you could have runes that affect clones. And this is another way like the mesmer kind of gets augmented in the future. And clones may seem kind kind of boring to you guys, but there are a few interesting things about this that could change them in some weird ways. For example, a thief getting clones isn't necessarily also getting shatters. So we're looking at a class that has clones and no real way to shatter them or utilize them in the same way that Mesmers do at all. Like, really, clones without shattering on a Mesmer, they're kind of useless. So how would that then be incorporated into the Daredevil in a useful way? So that brings me on to this other interesting idea, and that is the idea that you can pretend to be the clone. And so this was something I was really hoping would be a bigger part of Mesmer gameplay. You kind of maybe see a little bit of it in like some PU specs, but in general, because people know it's so easily identify the difference between player movement and AI movement and like active effects and stuff, you really don't see too much of this gameplay. Well, maybe that's something that the Daredevil, if it had clones, would then be tying into a little. The way that the clones work would be rather different if there's also no shatter, because like, how do you get rid of them? How many do you even have out at once? Maybe you only get to have one clone at any one time, and maybe they disappear after a few seconds on a set timer, and there could be a lot of stuff with the amount of stealthing and blinking that thieves already have access to on that profession. These kind of dupe plays would be really exciting to see. One thing that does still stick out in my mind is, and you can attribute this to the Chinese release as much as you like, they did drop the Monkey King very randomly into the game, and it has no real lore or anything associated with it. Heart of Thorns could be their opportunity to talk about the Monkey King somewhere in the jungle, and maybe there's additional stuff of the Monkey King with his staff, looking at things like Wukong in League of Legends. And what does Wukong do? Well, he creates these little clones, drops them, poops them out behind himself, and he fights with, a melee staff. There's a very good reason to believe the devs may have found inspiration in these kinds of things, and this whole, it's going to be a distracting week, could have something to do with you'll have thieves that can generate clones somehow. So there you go, guys. That's some speculation for you about the Daredevil, or, it might not even have that name in the end. These are the things we know. These are the speculations I'm throwing out. I do think of those three things I just said, it will probably be one of them. Either that or physicals will end up being the damn thing, and then we can all be very sad. Or at least I'll be sad. It could be so much cooler than physicals. In any case, let me know what you think, guys. Did I miss anything? I'll be very curious for some discussion on it. And I guess I'll see you on Wednesday when we find out how right or wrong we really were. Catch you next time, guys.